You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Welcome back to Music Tectonics, where we go beneath the surface of music and tech. I'm Dmitri, the CEO and founder of Rock, Paper, Scissors, the PR firm that specializes in music tech and innovation. And you're...
I am Tristan Neer-Yeager, the Chief Strategy Officer at the same wonderful PR firm, Rock, Paper, Scissors.
And today...
And it's great to get to talk to you.
Great to talk with you. Today, we're going to mix it up a little bit. We've been doing news roundups at the beginning of most of the episodes. We decided the news roundup and the rock, paper scanner is going to take over the entire episode this time. There's lots to talk about, and we have so much fun doing it. Right, Tristan? Say yes.
Yeah, it's really fun. No, this is not mandatory fun. It's actual fun. It's really fun to chat about.
It is cool to see what's happening out there and have a chance to, each week spend some time synthesizing with you.
Yeah, and there is so much going on. It is a very intense time.
Yeah, and if you don't know why we call it Rock, Paper, Scanner, we think about scanning the horizon for our work and for our clients in the PR business as well, seeing like what's going on around topics of the industry's health and revenue, around investments and acquisitions, and what's happening in the live side and the social side. And then also like what are the things around us that kind of inform what could happen in the future in music or should happen, maybe could or should, and it's just helpful to see all that. So we do this weekly newsletter that you can get in your inbox called the Rock Paper Scanner, where it's just like 20 or 30 of the most important headlines, both from the music trades, but also like in parallel universes as well. And it has been a busy news week the past week. I guess I'm going to throw out a couple of headlines just to make note of, and then I think we should dive into some stuff, if that sounds good.
Sounds great.
There were a couple of acquisitions that are worth noting. One, just because there seems to be an uptick in acquisitions, and there seems to be the beginning of some more investments. It seemed a little slow at the beginning of the year. Create Music Group acquired the indie electronic label Monstercat, reported by Music Business Worldwide. And Monstercat...
Jinx, buy me a Coke. Monstercat has really been quite innovative and in really smart ways, using newer technologies and even trendy technologies, but in a way that you're like, oh, that's really cool. That is the way it should be done. They know their audience really well, and they're not afraid to take some risks. But they do it in such a smart and savvy way. It's very, very
I think of them as a gaming first record label, the most kind of forward and engaged in the kind of a gaming world, which is interesting to see. And I think a lot of other labels and artists have followed suit. Oh, wow, look at this whole audience here that's interested in certain genres or scenes and that sort of thing. Another acquisition, I was not familiar with the brand called Bands, but apparently they were just acquired by Warner Music Group. And I actually found this on LinkedIn. And there's a link in the newsletter to their website saying they're expanding access to tools and transparency for artists. And one investment that Music Ally reported is Utonic raised $3.5 million for its Udom fandom tech platform. So always good to keep track of what's happening there. And I guess another one, Media Post did an interesting article called Jay Penske Takes Control of South by Southwest, Will Profits Politics Overtake Festival. And we've been watching what's been going on with South by Southwest closely because I go almost every year, and it's been a great place to meet up with interesting new startups and other players in the field. And for years, I've been going for, I don't know how long it's been, probably over a dozen years. And for years, people have talked about shifts happening at South by. It's really crowded this year. Oh, it's really not crowded this year. Or I can remember back when I saw Chuck D from Public Enemy perform inside a giant Fritos vending machine. And that was the year that everyone said, oh no, South by Southwest has gone corporate. And I'm like, I just saw Chuck D. I'm not that worried about the Fritos vending machine.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think there is, just to speak very generally, we were just talking about this before we hit record, there's a little bit of a vibe shift, but some of that feels a bit top down.
That's true. To get a little more granular here, I think it was the president who had been the head of programming for years, Hugh Forrest, left in this latest round. It's actually a series of layoffs there. The head of music programming left. So, according to the news, it wasn't directly related to the layoffs or shift there. But we're definitely seeing something's changing. It doesn't help that the Austin Convention Center is going to be being renovated for the next 3 years, I think it is. So they already announced like a shortening of the entire event. They've licensed the name of South by out to London and Australia. And I've heard various conversations about, are those even the same types of events, et cetera? Like I said, I've always had a great experience at South by. But yeah, if there's a shift in kind of what the goals are there, as well as the staffing and the soul of it, we'll just have to keep an eye on it.
Maybe there needs to be a March event.
I'm not going to compete with
person who plans events.
Music Tectonics is in November in LA.
Have I just Amazoned you? I just Amazon press released you. They're notorious for writing the press release and then forcing their product teams to build it.
We're not going to do something in March in Austin, but we are going to start putting tariffs on our registration badge invoices. Oh no, we're not. We're not.
Oh no, only for I'm sorry, for actual aliens.
Okay.
Sorry, we're getting a bit punchy here. Weird news of the weird
again,
here.
Trump signals willingness to extend TikTok ban deadline. Thank you, Music Business Worldwide, for keeping us posted on this, then that, then this. It's hard to keep up with, but TikTok bad, TikTok good, TikTok bad.
It was just like this past week, there was an announcement that there would be 100% tariffs on, here the scare quotes, foreign-made films. Which is very complicated to suss out exactly what qualifies as foreign made, because Hollywood has, like a lot of industries, gone very global in terms of its, especially when it comes to where things are shot, production, and even post-production as well. And then that was sort of walked back. That's another one of those we'll see what happens.
Yeah, there's a lot of that
kind of things. But one thing we do know for sure is that the NEA's grants have finally, I'm kind of surprised it took them this long, but the NEA has joined the NIH, the NEH, and all the other sort of federal grant makers in suddenly stopping and rescinding the grants they had already promised to organizations. Reuters had a pretty good piece on it that I believe was in the scanner, and you can take a look there at the details. But the bigger picture here is we don't often think in the music business about the performing arts side of the music world, but a lot of venues do, and a lot of concert series do, and a lot of community organizations that are the unsung heroes of especially emerging artists or artists who have cultural significance and may not be instantly commercially viable. These are the folks who are really the grassroots at this point. It's very difficult to run a for-profit club at this point, just because of the economics of real estate, rent, et cetera, in most communities. So this is something that's, the federal government hasn't been a massive funder of the arts traditionally in the U.S., unlike other countries, but it still is significant. And a lot of times what the NEA can provide is things like operating budget, which is very difficult to secure private grants for just your basic expenses like the electricity or the paper or somebody to run the copier, somebody to answer the emails. And so it's a pretty significant blow for some organizations. Here locally in Indiana, where Rock, Paper, Scissors is based, there was a wonderful arts organization that lost $40,000, basically its entire budget overnight. So it's important to remember that this also affects musicians and therefore the music business. And we should all be keeping an eye on some of these things.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally relevant. A lot of good music out there that gets that kind of support, but it was pulled overnight. In fact, there was a performance here in Portland, Oregon, where I'm based, that it was on opening night that they found that they weren't getting the $25,000 grant that they had already been agreed to. So, So widening out, Glenn Peoples has been on a tear with some really interesting analysis and insight at Billboard. And there was an article this week called "Are Music Companies Seeing Consumer Pullback? This Week's Earning Calls Offered an Answer." And basically, he says that despite worsening economic signals like the fall of the GDP, rising jobless claims, and declining consumer sentiment, major music industry leaders remain confident their sector is weathering the storm, and referring specifically to earnings calls from Live Nation, Spotify, and UMG, saying that the demand for music is still high, and all of them are pretty confident. Michael Rapino, the CEO at Live Nation, said, "We haven't seen a consumer pullback in any genre, club, theater, stadium, or amphitheater." And Live Nation's revenue increased 2.3%. The company's revenue jumped 21.1%. Just some interesting stuff there. Daniel X says engagement remains high, retention is strong. I don't see anything in our business right now that gives me any pause for concern. And Lucy Ann Grange from UMG said music has always proved to be incredibly resilient. It's low cost, high engagement, and obviously a unique form of entertainment. Yeah, interesting to hopeful to see this coming out of those reports, at least for the economy the music economy as a whole.
And if you want some more insight into that conversation about recession resistance and music, I believe Dan Runcie had a Trapital episode about that last week. Yeah. Or this week. I think it came out this week. And by the way, that was a Washington Post article I was referring to, not Reuters. I'm going to get to Reuters in a second here. In fact, maybe I'll do it right now. Reuters had some good coverage of the case against Meta brought on behalf of a bunch of authors, and that involves basically AI training. So like a lot of other folks looking to scoop up as much data as possible, Meta has pulled a bunch of copyrighted works into their data sets that include novels and books and other important works. And the judge so far has basically said this will destroy the impulse to make original works and for people to, I guess, sell their creative products. And I think there's an interesting debate that's opening up a little bit around that. Like, what is the role of copyright? What should it do? But I think in the music business, we're all pretty much in agreement that copyright is important and should stay. Maybe it needs some modification gently around the edges, but it definitely does not need to be thrown out with the bathwater. So it's interesting to see how all these discussions are unfolding in these various court cases in various verticals. But at the moment, I would say, and please listeners, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think we're leaning towards we have copyright, you should license works to train. And I think that is a growing consensus about what is fair and what will support the creative industries.
Yeah, when these legal cases get reported, I like reading like the specific arguments that are getting made. Like when you hear the actual words that are being used to make these cases. So from that Reuters article, Meta attorney Canon Shanmugam said copyright owners are not entitled to, quote, protection from competition in the marketplace of ideas. And then the judge Vince Chabria responds with, but if I'm going to steal things from the marketplace of ideas in order to develop my own ideas, that's copyright infringement, right? And he goes on to say, I think it's taken away by fair use unless a plaintiff can show that the market for the actual copyrighted work is going to be dramatically affected. So this debate, it's just like back and forth about the impact on the competition in the marketplace and the idea of free ideas. But if billions of new pieces of content are being created on somebody else's ideas, that doesn't really quite sound like it's solely about ideas at that point. You're really using the essence of the newly created piece to create these AI-generated pieces as well.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to really get granular about what is the origin, what is a derivative, how far does a derivative have to go to become an original work, and that may vary according to media, right? So what we're talking about in a book may feel radically different compared to a piece of music. But there is an industry that has already started to have enough evidence gathered to get some ideas about what AI will do. And this is a piece that you can read in the scanner from a company called Capture.co, The Silent Collapse, Generative AI's Erosion of Photo Licensing Revenue. Now, the headline is a little deceptive. It's more complicated than that. For instance, there's a really awesome graph that they have that shows the stock photography versus generative AI market size. And if you see, like so they're looking at they're comparing 2024, 2023, and the projections for 2030. The stock photo market actually grows, and not inconsiderably, but of course the AI market is exploding. So in 2023, it was almost nothing, and they are projecting by 2030, we're looking at almost $1 billion in market size, which is kind of interesting because if people are generating for free, how is that? Anyway, I'm not exactly sure how they're making this calculation. There's probably some good explanations there. But one interesting thing that has happened, and this is a question for music that I don't think music's being disrupted quite this way. And that could just be a matter of time. I don't know. But there is actually evidence of, according to folks like the Society of Authors, just to go back to the photos/illustrations. So 26% of illustrators lost work due to AI by early 2024. And 37% reported reduced income. And however, though, people are still looking for stock photos, according to these projections. It makes me wonder, Dmitri, and I wonder about this a lot in music, is are we looking at an actual expansion of use rather than a zero-sum game, right? So if more people can add music that they generate to say if you're an influencer and you're making something like a promoted post where you're not allowed to use commercial music without licensing it like you would for an ad, is that just going to simply expand how much music people are using because they can AI generate it and it's quote unquote license free or royalty free? And in some ways it looks like in the stock photo market, you're looking at the lower end being the most disrupted, whereas higher end, more premium products are less likely to be disrupted. And I think that also holds true for music. So from what we've heard from some CEOs and other folks we work with at Rock, Paper, Scissors, they are less concerned about high quality music being disrupted by AI generated music. And they see AI generated music as expanding the lower end of the market.
Trisha, this is a blast, but we've got to take a quick break. When we come back, let's get through some more of this news.
Join the Music Tectonics team online May 28th at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. UK time for our next seismic activity, Artists' Careers in a Parallel Universe. We'll be joined by creators Clara Venice and Vivek Agrawal to hear how they're leveraging new technologies, building brand relationships in this new landscape, and monetizing their networks. Register for free and learn more about our monthly Seismic Activity online event series at musictectonics.com.
I love this idea you're introducing of the technology could be introducing kind of like a middle tier or an additional tier of creation and creativity or more functional production in a sense. And really, when you think about what's the impact on the economy in terms of the job markets, the assumption is that it will replace jobs, right? But there's also an argument to be made that it will free certain people to be able to do something for the first time as well, which is interesting too. It does have like large economic impact in the short term where somebody's livelihood is like, oh, I just spent my last 10, 20 years mastering this craft, being able to make photographs or write books or make music or whatever. And now I'm finally ready to start profiting from all of the work to create a voice, but also to like master the tools or to build an audience or whatever. And now all of a sudden you see somebody who was way back at the beginning of the race who's going at a much faster pace than you. So there's this whole idea of stealing jobs from existing creators or workers, as you might say. I'm thinking about the printing press. There were all these scribes there was high demand for scribes before the printing press came along. But eventually there was need for other types of jobs, but more than anything, just a lot more stuff was getting written and printed and more than anything amplified and publicized. So all of a sudden there were voices that were never heard before that were able to get their content out to the world.
Yeah, and new formats like the novel,
right?
Arguably, that they did. There were novel-like writing in late Greece, in Rome. There's some other examples that you could call novels, but the novels as like a phenomenon really took off with the popular printing press in Europe, at least. I'd love to hear in China because I think the printing press was actually invented earlier than it was in the West. Anyway,
and Trisha, I don't know if there really was this economic impact. I don't know whether it creates more jobs or does the opposite, ends more jobs, puts more people out of work, or it may be that there's a period of transition. And I don't know if there's a direct parallel with what could happen in music with that. It's so hard to even define music making as a job.
Yeah, that's true. It's also really important to keep in mind that we're looking right now, it's a new shiny thing. So a lot of people are like, hey, let's do a whole AI generated ad campaign. But in 5 years, the younger people who grew up with AI are going to be like, that's really lame. like that looks, I don't like the way that looks. A premium company, a luxury brand would never, or it will be used really explicitly with other things. So I think there's going to be, even if AI improves, it is highly likely that humans will always be able to detect it to some extent, especially when it comes to, we can tell what's a drawing, even a really good photorealistic painting or drawing versus a photo. And maybe AI will get like that much better. I have questions about that. And I also think there will be some ongoing issues of like prestige and quality and craftsmanship. So yes, you can make a really great table in a factory. It's a solid table made out of the same materials, more or less, as a furniture maker might make, but you would pay significantly more for the furniture maker, and it's a much more of a prestige item or a work of art or a thing of beauty. So those things also matter to humans. And right now, all of that, those questions aren't being asked yet because in most conversations, because everyone's so obsessed with this shiny new thing. We're all being a little bit of little magpies right now when it comes to AI. Oh, wow, look at this. I'm going to get this. I'm going to put this in there and I'll be able to fire all my customer service people and we'll never need to have someone write something for us again. And all of that is probably not going to be true and will be looked at as like the foolishness of our age in like 5-10 years by history, I think.
Well, the other piece of all this is going back to what is the outcome of the legal suits around unethical, unlicensed training of AI. The two articles you brought in this week, one of them's about books and meta, and one of them's about photography and the licensing, the photo licensing market being eroded by AI. And I think the legal cases from each industry will influence the legal cases of the other verticals as well. So, whatever happens in the book and social media side will impact music for sure. But it's kind of like a toggle. Like right now with the political climate, it's very hard to predict how the courts will rule, as well as what
will be enforceable.
Right? Whether anybody enforces anything, which is, I know it's awful to say and awful to laugh at, but also like I think we're all feeling that sense of uncertainty, like what sticks, what doesn't stick when you have political leaders that are saying, I don't care, or it's not up to me to decide whether the Supreme Court's decision holds, or something like that, or, it's not up to me whether the Supreme Court has any authority or not. Well, it's in the Constitution, but other than that, it's...
the Constitution aside, I have no idea.
Exactly. I have great legal advisors who can tell me that. But I think it's still a toggle to consider is, how is this going to get ruled or enforced or not? Is there a case for fair use, or are all of the generative AI companies going to be forced to reckon with the idea that they have to license the stuff? At which point, in addition to licensing the stuff, they also will have to have some kind of system in place that are still being built around the attribution stuff that you talked about at a fractional level in a way that has never existed in the world before. It's so transformative. The process is so transformative that it's really hard to actually define. Maybe there could be thousands of influences on one Gen I output. And so we're kind of at this weird moment where you can make an ethical argument, but you can't quite make a strategic decision as a business. Whether you're a Gen AI company or an IP company, you can't quite decide do I lean into licensing now because it's going to be upheld by the courts and by the law, or do I start negotiating about the output without the licensing? Do we do it after the fact, after the creation moment? Are we trying to figure out whose music was the cause of the influence of whatever? So it feels like we're all just waiting to see how it plays out.
And a lot of media companies have made deals, like licensing deals, and there's a question about whether they're good deals or not. Did they get enough money for their content? Right? Some of them look like, that could be kind of fair, and some, I don't know, that looks a little low to me.
And the other thing that could happen
that's, again, nobody knows.
In terms of the licensing could be to the point where, yes, you have permission to train on our data, but then there's the terms and conditions for the user that's trying to generate new types of music through these platforms. What are they allowed to do? Once they've signed up and generated something, they've become the best music prompt engineer in the world to create an amazing song. Are they allowed to do anything with it afterwards? And
can it be copyrighted at all?
Exactly.
Or can it be monetized?
Right.
Yeah.
Can it even be played publicly?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think
that influences the licensing contracts on the front end for the training, but it also influences the terms and conditions for the user on the tail end, which I think even once we see some maturation in this discussion around licensing training data, there's going to be another whole long period where people are sorting out, well, am I allowed to upload this? Am I allowed to monetize it? Who owns it? We've heard that conversation was a couple years back, there were those conversations about when you create something on some of the more simple Gen AI music platforms, like we saw, AI companies getting credited for songs. And getting paid by streaming services,
as if they were composers. Exactly. And there's a legitimate argument that makes sense because they developed the algorithm that kind of did play a role in composing the song. The other thing, though, is this sort of points to, in some ways, it's beyond bifurcation, but this completely different universe where people just make music, and they have always done this for non-commercial reasons. Like there's this strange moment that we're in where we've copy pasted the traditional distribution pipeline, but with some digital variants, right? And now that whole pipeline is not relevant potentially to a huge body of music that's being made that could be shared, right? If I just play my guitar live in my room and sing like Layla or something to myself, no one knows about it and it can't be commercially distributed. But if I generate a song, I could potentially send that to all sorts of people and share it. It may not mean I want to monetize it or send it down the same distribution pipeline as Rihanna would with her next album. But so it's a huge question of what is this even, how is the music industry going to react to this other world? And it's a strange moment we live in. Exciting though, at the same time. There's an opportunity here somewhere.
No, if you can step outside of it, if your job's not being challenged by it, it is exciting. It's interesting to see. And the other thing is there will be new forms of creativity that come from it. And that's exciting too. Is there are people who are making music for the first time, possibly in collaboration with software programmers. But who's to say that, like, how different is that from the audio programmers who build the engines underneath synth and sequencing devices and so forth, or DAWs and plugins? There's a lot.
Yeah.
Could you imagine if you invented one of these DAWs or plugins that turned out to like be used across thousands of hit songs already, and to think about some decision you made about a sound wave that changed the course of musical history? That would be
Auto-tune. Comes to mind.
Auto-tune, yeah. Oh, exactly. Do the auto-tune inventors and engineers feel like, did they transform music or did they ruin it? But
you can do cool stuff with auto-tune. If you've got a lot of melismatic ornaments, it snaps them into place in a really interesting way. So you can make cool things with auto-tune that isn't just share.
From Tristra, we're going to use that in our marketing materials.
You don't have to just believe in the power of love with Cher, where you sound like a robot.
I'm not really criticizing autotune, just making a joke. But but it's interesting.
Yeah. We love Cher. We love autotune. Please don't get on us in the comments.
On the back of autotune and its competitors.
Absolutely. Yes, and it's wonderful competitors who keep everything fresh and exciting.
No dog wars here.
No. We love you all. You're all our favorite children.
But like the amount of creativity that'll come from it. It's those painful moments in between where there's these economic shifts that impact people's livelihoods as well. But this trip, before we go, because we are coming up on the half hour here, and next week we will go back to our traditional format. I've got an interview with Ty Roberts that's super fun. If you're interested in hearing about what he thinks is coming in the future, this is the founder of GraceNote, a company that got sold for a couple $100 million. And he continues to be so active in the music innovation space. And just to drop a little hint about that episode, his focus is on the future of music is visual. And all the ways to think about that.
Oh, I love it.
It's really interesting to hear about somebody who's been focused on metadata in the past. It's all this content.
I feel seen, heard as a synesthete.
Nice. So we will get back to a regular episode next week. But Trisha, before we go, what I love about this conversation, it kind of lets our listeners in on some of the ways that you, as our chief strategy officer, think about the industry and the wider society and how that influences how we work with our clients to advise them around thought leadership, around storytelling, around like how do we weave their stories into things that are relevant for what's happening in the world.
Yeah, and how to push the conversation forward. Like we were talking this week on Slack in the office about stories we would love to see. And it's not just because they would flatter our clients, which of course is also a goal, but also because they're interesting stories that people haven't quite picked up on yet. And those are always the most fun pitches to make as a publicist, if I may get inside baseball here for a second.
We talk with so many companies, whether they're clients or partners at Music Tectonics or listeners from the podcast or just, new companies that are
randos.
What's that?
Or just randos.
And journalists as well. We're like,
yes.
We kind of get an interesting insight into like a lot of different ideas and things that are happening. And then in our brains, we're saying, how do these patterns all fit together? And then you start to see like a constellation, almost like you look at the constellation of stories that are happening, but then you also have these blank spaces in the sky where you're like, I'm pretty sure I can't see the constellation yet, but I can see these stars are starting to align around something that's a story that needs to come out. That's a trend or a pattern or an insight or a projection of something that's emerging around music innovation, which is why I love talking to you like this, Trisha. It's been super fun.
Yeah, it's so much fun. It's so much fun.
So we'll be back next week with a regular episode, and we'll probably do these news roundups a bit more through the summer because we're having a blast. Thanks, Trisha. Yeah,
and if there's ever anything you want us to riff on,
let us know.
Audience, just shout. Want to hear it. All right, thanks you, Dmitri.
Thanks for listening to Music Tectonics. If you like what you hear, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We have new episodes for you every week. Did you know we do free monthly online events that you, our lovely podcast listeners, can join? Find out more at musictectonics.com. And while you're there, look for the latest about our annual conference and sign up for our newsletter to get updates. Everything we do explores the seismic shifts that shake up music and technology, the way the Earth's tectonic plates cause quakes and make mountains. Connect with Music Tectonics on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. That's my favorite platform. Connect with me, Dmitri Vitsa, if you can spell it. We'll be back again next week, if not sooner.
You're listening to Music Tectonics.